Okay, now we go back in time to our second reading, which comes again from the letter to the Hebrews, chapter 7, verses 23 through 28. Brothers and sisters, the Levitical priests were many because they were prevented by death from remaining in office. But Jesus, because he remains forever, has a priesthood that does not pass away. Therefore, he is always able to save those who approach God through him, since he lives forever to make intercession for them. It was fitting that we should have such a high priest, holy, innocent, undefiled, separated from sinners, higher than the heavens. He has no need, as did the high priest, to offer sacrifice day after day, first for his own sins and then for those of the people. He did that once for all when he offered himself. For the law appoints men subject to weakness to be high priests, but the word of the oath which was taken after the law appoints a son who has been made perfect forever. Okay, real good. So just like actually in our gospel passage, this is kind of, I don't know, strange. Remember our gospel passage, we skipped a whole chapter and a half. So too, we skip more than a chapter and a half from our second reading. If you remember last week, we finished with chapter 5, verse 9, and then we skipped a whole bunch. We skipped all of chapter 6, the rest of chapter 5, and now we are like this is the end of chapter 7. So we skipped quite a bit, actually. It's kind of a strange thing. And in that part that we skipped, St. Paul talks about, well, so this is one of, oh man, it's so funny to me. So he's talking about the priesthood of Jesus. We've been talking about the high priest of Jesus, and how I had to try to fumble through like explaining how Jesus is the high priest, the eternal high priest, the great high priest, even though he's not from the tribe of Levi, he's from the tribe of Judah. And so like, how in the world does that work? How, like, all that stuff, it's like I had to fumble through that, and it's like I don't know that I fully even understand it, but I think I do. Right after that, St. Paul, or excuse me, not St. Paul, so who knows who wrote the letter to the Hebrews? Some people think it's St. Paul, some people think it's not. And for that matter, during Mass, we read a reading from the letter to the Hebrews. So anyway, so the author talks about, he's like, about this we have much to say, and it is difficult to explain, for you have become sluggish in hearing. That's the thing that I think is really funny, why is it difficult to explain? Because you have become sluggish. So it's the same for all of us, I suppose. You know, that whole thing of like loving the Lord with your mind? When we don't love him with our mind, what happens to our mind is we become sluggish when it comes to spiritual things. And I think this is also kind of the state of the church. It's probably the state of my life. In fact, in chapter 6, at the very beginning, he says, therefore, let us leave behind the basic teaching about Christ and advance to maturity without laying again the foundation of repentance from dead works and faith in God. So it's so funny. Like, let's leave behind the elementary doctrines and move forward with more mature doctrines. And it's like, I think for the average person, these are not elementary by any means. These are like advanced level. Like, how in the world could a person possibly understand this about the scriptures? So it just shows us like how little we as a people, and this includes myself, how little we have engaged loving the Lord with our minds. And so because of that, we become sluggish, and we're incapable of understanding what at one point was elementary doctrine. Now, it is true, I suppose, to give us a little bit of a leeway here, it is true that we weren't raised Jewish, and so it doesn't come naturally that we would understand the Jewish laws, the Jewish priesthood, all those things that took place in the Old Testament. So we get that going for us, I suppose, so we can kind of let ourselves off the hook a little bit. At the same time, we live in a very literate country with Bibles at our fingertips. And now we live in a time where so many great Bible studies are available to us online, on YouTube, podcasts, actual like written literature. There's so much good stuff. So anyway, let's advance in our elementary doctrine, what we consider to be advanced doctrine. Let's keep advancing. Okay, so anyway, so then from there, in chapter 7, he talks about Melchizedek as a type of Christ. So a type is someone who prefigures something that is to come. So Melchizedek is a priest a priest of God Most High, king of Salem, excuse me, and he is a type. He's a prefigurement of Christ. That's what the author is saying. So if Melchizedek is a priest of God Most High and is a king of Salem, that makes sense then that Jesus is a greater priest and he is a greater king, because Melchizedek is a type. And this is what the Bible teaches us, that Melchizedek is, I'm not just making this up, but Melchizedek is in fact that. And what's more, the author makes mention of the very thing that we've been talking about, which is that we know that the Lord came from Judah. He didn't come from Levi. How in the world does that work? The priesthood of Levi, the Levitical priests, which we hear about in our reading here, the Levitical priests, that comes from the tribe of Levi, because they did not worship the golden calf as all of the rest of the tribes did. And from the Levitical priesthood flows the Aaronic priesthood. So Aaron was the high priest, the first high priest. And so then from there, all of the high priests would come from the tribe of Levi. So how in the world does that work? The author is trying to suggest to us. And he says what becomes obsolete is no longer necessary, is no longer true, because what was obsolete offered us merely imperfect sacrifices. Jesus has come to make that obsolete and to bring us back to the Melchizedekian priesthood. So that's kind of what's going on. So then from there, if you remember, the whole, a big part of the letter to the Hebrews, maybe the whole point, but for sure a big part of it, is to compare the Old Covenant with the New Covenant, and how the Old Covenant is great and it offers us graces from God. But the New Covenant that Jesus offers us is even greater. And so the author's whole point is like, look, don't go back to the Old Covenant, because you know that that's not the fullness of the truth. And so that's why it makes sense here that we begin our reading by saying the Levitical priests, they were many because they were prevented from death, from remaining in office. But Jesus, because he remains forever, has a priesthood that does not pass away. So he's like, okay, look, there were all these Levitical priests, and there were many of them. They were subject to death, and so therefore, their offerings were imperfect. Jesus, he's one. And yes, he was subject to death, but as it turns out, he rose, and now he lives forever. And so you don't need someone to replace him, because he's irreplaceable. These guys, they're all replaceable, but Jesus is irreplaceable. So therefore, he is always able to save those who approach God through him, since he lives forever to make intercession for them. That, I think, it's a really valuable thing to understand, that Jesus' priesthood does not pass away, but it actually persists. So that the author says that he lives forever for this purpose, to make intercession. So I think this is a good biblical thing. It's also a good part of Catholic doctrine, is that Jesus' sacrificial offering to the Father, it does not cease, it doesn't stop on Good Friday. Even though he rises from the dead, he dies, he rises from the dead. And so it seems like, okay, well, he made his offering and that's it. No, the Bible says that he lives forever to make intercession. He lives forever to offer supplication to the Father. So it's not many sacrifices, it's one continuous sacrifice, this one priesthood that persists forever. That's a helpful thing to understand, because what we as Catholics talk about when we talk about the Mass as a sacrifice, we talk about it as that. Some of our Protestant brothers and sisters will get on us about that, of like, how could you offer sacrifice day after day after day after day, week after week after week, when the one sacrifice of Jesus is good once and for all? He says this, that it's fitting that we should have such a high priest, holy, innocent, undefiled, separated from sinners, higher than the heavens. So someone who's way different from the Levitical priesthood, who, when the high priest went in on the day of Yom Kippur, he first had to offer a sacrifice for his own sins, because he himself is a sinful man. Jesus is holy, he's innocent. He's undefiled, he's separated from sinners, so he's different, he's better than all of these priests over here. He's better. So it's fitting that we should have this high priest, and so therefore he has no need, as did the high priest, to offer sacrifice day after day, first for his own sins and then for those of the people. He did that once for all when he offered himself. So he has no need to participate in this priesthood, because his priesthood is so much greater and more perfect. And so there's this question of like, well, what are we doing as Catholics by calling our worship sacrifice? By saying that we have priests, many priests who live and die and who offer the sacrifice day after day after day when they're offering the Mass. Like, what's going on there? Well, and I think we're going to see this further down the road, but what we're talking about is that the priests that we have in the New Testament, they participate in the priesthood, the eternal priesthood of Jesus. So we could say this in a real way, in a very real way, that the priests of the Old Testament, Old Covenant, they prefigured the priesthood of Jesus. So they're all there offering sacrifice for the remission of sin. They are prefiguring the great priesthood, the great high priesthood of Jesus Christ. Priests of the New Covenant, that is like the priests that we have now in our church, they are participating in this priesthood of Jesus, because he lives forever to intercede. And so he does this forever in heaven, because he's a heavenly priest. And so on earth, he allows those men who are ordained to participate in this heavenly ministry on earth. And so when we come together for Mass, it is a sacrifice, but it's not a new sacrifice. It's not sacrificing Jesus again and again and again. No, it is participating in this one perpetual, continuous sacrifice of Jesus Christ on the cross. That's what we're doing in the Mass. Like I've mentioned this before, is this like beyond time kind of experience. That we are bound by time, but the Lord is not bound by time. And so when we come, we enter into a certain kind of timelessness. So that even though, like, the time passes during our Mass and everyone's watching their watches to see if, better not be longer than an hour or whatever, there is a certain timelessness that we enter into because the priest is acting not as himself, but he's acting in the person of Christ, who is continuously offering himself in intercession in heaven, who now comes down to earth to share that sacrifice with us so that we can participate in it. So that's what's going on. So when it says the law, or excuse me, when it says he did that once and for all, yes, he did that once and for all on the cross, on Calvary. That's absolutely true. He's not re-sacrificed day after day after day. At the same time that he did that once and for all, he does it once and for all time, once and forever. That it is a continuous sacrifice. It's both and. It's both once and for all, and that's it. There will not be another re-crucifixion of Jesus. But he also does that crucifixion of Jesus, it is timeless. His sacrifice to the Father, it is timeless in the eternal reality of what's taking place. So that's big. Okay, so now let's continue this reading. Let's just finish it. For the law appoints men subject to weakness to be high priests, but the word of the oath, which was taken after the law, appoints a son who has been made perfect forever. A son. This is family language, which means it's covenantal language. This oath that he makes, it is a covenant. It is a sacred family bond that we get to participate in, and he has been made perfect forever. I've mentioned this before. What does it mean for Jesus to be made perfect? Again, the Greek word is teleoo, which points toward priestly ordination. In Exodus 29, Aaron and his sons were ordained. They were made perfect through their, so the Hebrew word is different, but the Greek translation of the Hebrew word is this word teleos, this perfection, this ordination of the priesthood. So that's what's going on here, is that Jesus is not being perfect as though he was imperfect before. It's just pointing to his final sacrifice as priest, being ordained by God as priest to offer himself in sacrifice. So anyway, it's so good. It's not really connected to our readings at all, the other two readings, but I think, again, if a person wanted to preach about this, like just to continue to focus on this great high priesthood of Jesus, and even if not to focus on it in the homily, you can still just still marvel at the goodness of God who's provides his son Jesus, who comes to offer himself in sacrifice, and then he allows us on earth to participate in that sacrifice, above all when we're at Mass. Again, a beautiful thing for us to enter into worship and to understand that we're not entering into something that is bound by space and time, even though it might feel that way. We're actually entering into a certain kind of timelessness. And so maybe for some of us, it might just be a benefit to say, I'm actually going to take my watch off during Mass, so I'm not focused on looking at the clock. I'm going to leave my phone in my car, so I'm not focused on looking at the clock, because I just want to be in the timelessness of this act of worship. Man, what a beautiful thing that is. So good. I love this Bible. I just love the Bible study. I say it every time, and whatever. It's just so good. I hope you find it to be a delight as well. I hope you find it to be something that is engaging, maybe even challenging, in your intellect, in your heart, in your mind, in your soul. Either way, it's a great gift. So I'm glad to share it with you, and I always look forward to being with you next week. God bless you.